The only thing that the Crown has presented was my sermon to the truckers and the farmers, includes exactly 1 year ago. What did I say during the speech? Well, I said to the people to stand for the grounds. I told them to do it peacefully, no guns, no swords. Well, the Crown prosecutor is comparing my speech to Rwanda genocide. I mean, that was a shocker. Well, I'm hoping to be vindicated 100%. I mean, I've done nothing wrong. If this is a trial of the century, if I'm convicted by giving people a sermon from our heart, reminding them about our history of the solidarity movement, if that's criminal behavior, there goes your freedom of expression, there goes your freedom of religion, there goes all your freedoms. What
Fast forward, I believe he was found guilty.
did my brother do at the border? He was called there to officiate a church service. So now you want to tell me that in Canada, you cannot officiate a church service as a clergy
Pretty much.
man? What else did he do? He inspired the people to stand for their families, for their jobs, for their God-given freedoms. And on top of that, they had a Holy Communion. So what, Holy Communion now, if you do it as a clergyman or just a citizen, you're faced with a 10.5-year prison term. It's absolutely insanity.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Canada has descended into the realm of absolute insanity. What time is it? I have no idea what time it is. It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Today's been a jam-packed day of scheduled and unplanned and planned appearances. I was on Rubin this morning with Barnes talking about the cocaine in the White House that they're never going to find the culprit for. Then was on the panel on Eric Hunley's channel with Steve Gosney, Southern Poverty Law, Uncivil Law, Joe Neerman, Nate Brody. And I think it's going to be at 5 o'clock or 5:05. I'm going to be on with Richard Surrett, one of my favorite radio places. Well, not one of my favorite radio places. One of my favorite places to go on the radio, talking about RFK Jr. and the little powder in the White House, which is no big deal according to the media now. Just a little cocaine in the White House, just a little white powder making it past security. Could have been anthrax, but this time it's cocaine, and we're never going to find out who did it. Okay. And so what ended up happening is at some point during the day, I was made aware of the fact that Nathaniel Pawlowski, Artur Pawlowski's son, David Pawlowski's nephew, I think, if I have genealogy right, was going to have a window to come on and talk about what's going on with his dad, what's going on with his uncle, what's going on with him. And then as I'm messaging, arranging this, I think you've seen it on Twitter. The breaking news coming from Artur Pawlowski is that his son, let me just make sure I don't misread anything. I know I retweeted it. Breaking news, this is from Artur Pawlowski. The Calgary Police has issued a warrant for Nathaniel Pawlowski, the son of the persecuted pastor Artur Pawlowski, who's facing 10 years imprisonment for delivering the sermon that we spoke there, where he got convicted of it. The warning was 5 months ago. That video that we started off with, 5 months ago. If I'm convicted, there go your freedoms. Freedoms are long gone in Canada. And what's just blowing my mind and making me a little bit frustrated is there are too many Canadians, educated, good people that I know personally, who don't seem to understand the severity of the situation. So long as things are good enough for them, they'll tolerate inconveniences. Like Anna Kasparian, they'll tolerate it until it shows up on their front door. And then the tweet goes on. We did not have to wait too long for the retaliation of the tyrannical Canadian government after Nathaniel's powerful speech that he delivered on July 4th, 2023 in the European Parliament. We watched that video yesterday, or at least the first half. Please keep our family in your prayers and spread the word around about this ongoing unlawful persecution, not prosecution, persecution of our family. Thank you. Please contact the authorities. This is reading the tweet. Thank you. P.S. Please contact the authorities and let them know what you think about this unbelievable craziness. There is a picture with their contact to call or send emails. That's on Artur Pawlowski's Twitter feed. Now, his son is waiting patiently in the backstage of Viva StreamYard. It's going to be amazing. We're going back to childhood because I do have a lot of questions. I'm going to maybe get an interview with Artur as well at some point this summer. But right now, the window for today is Nathaniel, who's now apparently facing charges. We're going to find out for what. Nathaniel, I'm bringing you in 3, 2, 1. Sir, At the risk of asking the obvious, how is everything going?
Well, it's going as good as it can be after you just found out that you have a warrant out for your arrest. Um, so I guess good.
I'm going to ask you now, but we're going to get back into it. Do you know what this warrant is for? I'm predicting it's for inciting mischief.
Well, it would be a fair assumption, but no, not quite. I actually don't know what the warrant is for, but here's what I do know. Upon leaving Canada to go speak at the European Union Parliament, there was no warrant because I left the country. My passport was not flagged, but upon returning from Brussels, Belgium, my passport was flagged, and I was informed by Montreal Customs that my passport is flagged and I have a warrant out for my arrest in Calgary from the Calgary Police Service. So within the last couple of days, there was a warrant issued, and they actually did something similar to my father when he was in the States doing a speaking tour, exposing what the Canadian government is doing, telling Americans, warning Americans that this is happening to their neighbor to the north. And this obviously is what they're doing to me. They're punishing me for exposing Canadian tyranny on foreign soil. So what I did is I told the European Parliament, this is what Canada is doing to pastors. This is what they're doing to Canadians. And it's tyranny. Trudeau is acting like a tyrant, and the Canadian local authorities are acting no better. So clearly they just wanted to punish me, and they issued a warrant. I have no idea what the warrant is for, but that's what I was informed upon arriving.
I'm not going to jump to your defense. Maybe you've done some terrible, terrible things in Calgary that the government only now discovered. I'm joking. It's a freaking joke. Let's just back this all the way up for a second. How old are you?
23.
You're 23. And now, look, questions. I guess I'll have a few fewer questions to ask Artur when I get him on for an interview. How many siblings do you have?
I have a younger brother and a younger sister.
Okay, so there's 3 kids. From your dad. I don't know your dad's marriage situation. Your mom is.
Yeah. My mom's with me actually. We went to Brussels together.
Okay, now you're born in Canada, correct?
Yes.
And
Calgary.
your dad was born in Poland?
Yes, and my mom. They were both born behind the Iron Curtain under communism in Poland, and they actually met in Greece because they escaped communism. They moved to Greece, and that's actually where my parents met.
That's fascinating. How old are your parents, if I may ask, or if they don't mind you telling me?
They're both 50.
Both 50. Born therefore, let me just do some quick math. 1973.
Yes.
Dude, your parents are barely older than me. Oh my God, I feel so old now. And I was going to say,
sorry, my mom's 49. She's 50 coming up here.
No, but I feel like that old man. I was going to say, you're a handsome young boy. Now, like I realize I've become that 60-year-old geezer that looks at a young person and sees youth and beauty and optimism. Okay, so they both escaped Poland to go to Greece. Met in Greece. Would you know where they got married? Did they get married in Greece or in Canada?
It was in Greece.
And then they moved to Canada. Do you know how old they were when they came?
It was 1995, I believe. Not sure how old the math there, but yeah, I think it was 94, 95. Yeah.
Okay, this is so amazing. I mean, this is like in my generation. This is not like this seems like a long time ago for you, or even before your consciousness, which it was. My goodness, you're so young. Okay, so they get to and where do they end up? They end up in Alberta,
Calgary. Yeah.
And your dad has been what they call a street preacher since he's come to Canada.
No. So when they lived in Greece, they were actually very successful builders, developers. They had a very successful business. They were building houses for the richest people in Athens. Some of the billionaires, some of the richest people on earth. Actually, they were building houses. They were doing very well financially. But there was huge corruption. So everything was done with bribery. You had to bribe the police to get certain permits. You had to bribe politicians. Like that was just the system. Like Canadians, Americans, North Americans, Western people, they don't understand that is like a regular system. Or if you go to Mexico, you'll see something similar. If you live there, you got to bribe police. If you want to go about your daily life, you bribe police, you bribe politicians. Like that's just life in countries like this. And my grandparents, they were so sick of it. They're like, why can't we just live in a free and democratic society without this nonsense of having to bribe and all this corruption going on? So they went to the embassy, and Canada's doors were wide open. They said, come to Canada. It's the freest country on earth. You'll never be persecuted for your beliefs, right? That was a huge concern for people that lived in Poland, that you'll be persecuted for your faith, for your religion, for freedom of speech, stuff like that. Canada promised them freedom. So they moved to Calgary. My father started building houses again here in Canada. He did other small businesses, and he was doing well off. Then he had an encounter with God, and he decided to become a preacher, feeding the poor, full-time ministry job. So that's when he became a pastor, and this was after I was born, and that's what he's been doing ever since I was born. That's what he's been doing full-time: preaching, ministry, feeding the poor, 24/7.
And if I may ask, did your mother at the time also work?
She's always had jobs, but ever since I was born, she'd been helping with the ministry, raising me and my siblings, and helping out with the ministry. She pretty much runs the feeding of the poor now. My dad's busy with other things. My dad still comes down, preaches, but because of the house arrest situation, some of the conditions and stuff, he can do that less and less. So my mom runs that operation when it comes to feeding the homeless on the streets of Calgary.
Okay, now I'm going to ask. I'll delve into the revelation or that moment of awakening with your dad, if and when he comes on or we meet up for an interview. Let me ask you this: growing up, you're the oldest of three, and your dad is I don't want to use a pejorative word. I don't know if street pastor has like an insulting connotation, but you're growing up in what is an atypical household. What is it like growing up where your parents feed the poor as a livelihood, like in that type of environment? Is it do you appreciate at the time that it is unique, or did it feel unique at the time?
So what's interesting is the mainstream media tend to use it as an insult, right? He's a street preacher. That's all he is. He actually has several ordinations. So he is a pastor of a regular church. We have a full-time church on Saturday, and on Sunday we have a service, and we have like Bible study on Wednesday. Plus we're on the streets feeding the poor 3 times a week. So it's full-time pastoral ministry. But he is also a street preacher. That's how he started, preaching on the streets. So they try to use it as an insult to somehow denigrate, but it's not insulting. They try to use it as a denigration. But growing up in a household like this isn't normal, to say the least, because no one behaves this way, right? Like even our vehicles, right? They all have something on the vehicles, stickers or write-ups and stuff. Something about Jesus, something about God, something about faith, something about salvation. So it's a very different growing up. And also, when you're young, you're given sort of this kind of reverence towards law enforcement, police. You're right. You're taught that you're supposed to respect police officers because they represent the law. Well, that wasn't really for me, because when I was 6 years old, that was my dad's first arrest. His first encounter with the law was actually 2005, where he was ticketed for feeding the homeless illegally. So apparently, if you give someone a free sandwich, it's actually breaking the law in the city of Calgary under a bylaw. So my dad was arrested in 2006 when I was 6 years old for reading the Bible in a public park, because the police officer said the Bible is offensive. You can't do this in this area, even though it's a public park. Anyway, he's been arrested like 16 times now, beat every single charge, every single ticket, over 350 tickets, 16 arrests. Every single one he's won, except for the latest one, which was the sermon to the truckers that you played at the beginning of the show. So, growing up in this, it's been, it becomes normal. So I became kind of numb to the fact that police act this way. My dad said, he would teach us, this is what he encountered. My grandparents would tell me, this is what communism was like, where the police actually don't represent the people. They represent the establishment. They represent the elites. They don't represent the common people like they're supposed to, right? We pay their salary through taxes. They're supposed to represent us, but that's not what they do anymore. So my dad taught us, and I know from history, studying myself, this is communism. This is fascism. This is how these totalitarian regimes operate, with police acting this way. So growing up, it was a different perspective, because not everyone understood that this is what, they would always say he's a troublemaker, so this is why he's having run-ins with the law. That's kind of what the mainstream media, that's what everyone would kind of think and say. But the truth is, he was just acting within his rights, doing everything legally, and that shows because he's won every single court case to date.
Let me ask you this. So sometime, and we've grown up in the wake of the Second World War, where I knew people whose parents or grandparents came from overseas or came from Europe for one reason or the other. Some of them were wiser beyond their years because of their experience. Others were scarred and damaged because of their experience, and sometimes imparted that or imputed that onto their kids in terms of upbringing. Your dad, wiser, or did he have lingering trauma from his experience in Poland and Greece?
Definitely wiser. However, I'd say both. I'd say a lot of growing up under an oppressive regime, there's going to be trauma there. I mean, think about it. If you're subjected to watching police beat you and torture you, and you can get, in Poland, if you didn't listen to the right radio station, you could get 5 years in prison. If you were caught with the Solidarity Movement pamphlet, Solidarity Movement is the movement, the peaceful non-compliance resistance that broke the Iron Curtain, that actually repelled the Soviets in 1989. If you were caught, my mom was actually distributing pamphlets. For that, if she was caught with a pamphlet, it's a year in prison. So obviously that's going to have trauma on anyone that grows up in a system like that. But you also understand that you see a person that grows up like this, you have to understand, sees the signs of tyranny before anyone else. That's why the biggest advocates for freedom in Canada and the United States are immigrants or second generation, because their parents or they themselves experienced or heard about what sort of led to full-on tyranny. And they know the signs of tyranny and they can warn people about it. So that's what my dad's been doing the last 20 some years.
Growing up, what kind of school? Religious school, obviously?
In Poland?
No, for you in Canada.
Yeah, I went to a Christian high school, but I went to a regular university, a public university. I graduated with a degree in criminal justice. So I've had a taste of both, and I can tell you the education system is at a very dangerous place. I'll tell you that much.
You're born in the year 2000.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Meeting people of like conscious adults who were like not but they did not live through 9/11. Like that's the demarcation between old and the young generation for me. Criminal justice, you said, we don't need to do too much of the education. And you're 20 years old when COVID comes down, but you've now experienced your dad getting arrested, having his run-ins with, call it capricious, arbitrary bullshit laws. I suspect the feeding the poor, it was some sanitary thing where you're not allowed feeding cold cuts or sandwiches because it might be, was that the basis of the infraction?
No, actually, that would have been more logical. However, they actually made a bylaw that says you're not allowed to give free goods and services in the city of Calgary. So if I hand you a Bible, that's giving a service. If I hand you a sandwich, that's giving a good. And you're not allowed to give anything for free, or you'll be charged. And it's actually penalty of jail as well. So he's been arrested with that multiple times. He's been arrested for reading the Bible. He's been arrested for feeding the poor. He's been arrested for keeping his church open through COVID. He's been arrested for holding prayers, like all sorts of arbitrary things. And if you get into, I would recommend asking my dad this question because he can shed more light about it than I can. But the real deepest reason, the deeply rooted reasons why they went after him actually started in the early 2000s when he started taking more homeless off the street than mainstream shelters like the Mustard Seed, Salvation Army, Drop-In Center. He was doing more good than they were. And it turns out homelessness is actually a huge business. And these places get government funded money per head. So like cattle, the more homeless, the more government grants you get, the more government money from the provincial government and the federal government you get. So when he started taking off 600 homeless people in the first couple months off the streets, well, someone's losing a lot of money. Then there's the drug business. A lot of these homeless people are hooked on drugs. So the drug business started to go down. If you look into the deep reasons, my dad can tell you all about this. When you actually look into the corruption behind this, why they went after him in the early 2000s, why this started, it will blow your mind because it's so much more than you can imagine.
It's actually... Sorry, not even something I had ever even contemplated. The world discovered your dad with this video. I'll play it just for a portion of it so that people can refresh their memories. When Alberta Health Services was coming in during Easter telling him to shut down. Sorry, I had to pick it from Fox News, people. There's no audio. Hold on.
Property, immediately get out. Get out of this property immediately. Out. I don't want to hear anything. Out of this property immediately. I don't want to hear a word.
Look at his face.
Out of this property immediately until you come back with a warrant.
I'm going to close that down. All right. Then, it went on. People had seen that. It went viral, and that's when the world discovered Artur. And now you're adding an entire new, deeper dimension to your dad's existence that I think many people might not have fully appreciated. So you have this, you grow up with your dad, you know this, and he's telling you like this goes back 15 years before 2020 COVID, and then COVID hits. Where are you when COVID goes down? You're in Alberta, you're in Calgary?
Yeah, I was in Calgary. I was in university. So I had my own struggle with trying to finish my degree without agreeing to certain mandates and regulations that the government was forcing the university to adhere to. So I fought them on it. I actually ended up winning, and I could finish my degree, but it wasn't easy. I had my own fight there, but I won't get into too much detail. But basically, I told the university if they don't let me finish my degree, I'm going to sue them. They said, okay, go ahead. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm going to sue you personally, the person who denied my exemption to certain mandates, and who weren't allowing me to continue my education unless I adhered to certain mandates. And that scared them. And they said, okay, we'll give you an exemption.
And what was the trajectory of your dad during this? I mean, he didn't stop, or he didn't let down for 1 second from day one?
Yeah, day one. I mean, first 2 weeks were interesting when COVID started because no one knew what this was. Is this the Black Plague? You hear reports and see videos of people dropping in Wuhan, China, and people dying in Italy on the streets. So you're like, wow, maybe this is the bubonic plague or something. Like, first 2 weeks, you have no idea what's going on. And then they started using certain language that my father remembers from communism. Recommendations, mandates. They're not laws, they're mandates. What was the social distancing? Certain words, and he said he recognized immediately that these mimic the words of past oppressive governments. And the maths didn't start to add up. We have family in Europe. They were telling us what the media is saying is not happening in Europe. So that, Europe was hit first before North America. So we had reports from family in Europe, and they're saying this is not actually happening. So we very quickly, we knew, okay, this is nonsense. And my dad was the first person to get a COVID ticket in Canada. He was the first Canadian to get a COVID ticket for not adhering to the public health measures because he continued feeding the poor. And it was like minus 30 in Calgary because it was winter time. It was February, March. It was very cold, and he kept feeding the poor because he told the government, if I don't feed them, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to resort to crime. They're going to resort to breaking into people's houses and cars and stuff. So I'm going to feed them. I'm going to keep feeding them. This is my job. And they said, no, you can't feed them. There's mandates. We're in the greatest pandemic of all time. You can't do this. So he was the first person to receive a ticket for that.
It's unbelievable. You say that your dad could recognize the language because he had lived through it elsewhere. And when I was doing the trucker, when I was reporting, when I was live streaming the protest, and the people I was talking to, like Hungarians from South America, from the Eastern Bloc, from Egypt, and they were saying, look, I know what the language looks like. I know what it looks like. It might not be the same distance, but it's the same direction. And one day after one of the protests, a Chinese guy came up to me, a man from China, and he said, is your camera off? And I said, the camera's off. I'm going back to my car. And he says, the verbiage that Trudeau is using, I think it was the fringe minority with holding unacceptable views. He's like, that is verbatim what they used to use back in the day in China. Verbatim, just a translation. He says, I speak both languages, verbatim. And the people sounding the alarms were the ones who had lived through it. And the ones, I'm just going to bring up this, that's us. I don't want to bring that one up. The one who came in there from Alberta Health Services, who has eyes of someone who has never seen communism, as far as I can imagine. This woman right here, she looks very nice and sympathetic, and like she truly believes in what she's doing. Those who have never seen it, never lived through it, don't know how to identify it, and don't know it's here until it's too late. So your dad is fighting it from day one again, gets the first ticket. What are you doing in all this time? Is there at any point, is there a time where you say, Dad, just chill out and don't be so provocative, for lack of a better word?
No. Growing up, experiencing tyranny on a different level, right? COVID, it's kind of like post 9/11, pre 9/11. Now it's going to be pre-COVID, post-COVID. And pre-COVID, he was experiencing 10 arrests. So he was arrested 10 times pre-COVID, like 300 tickets or something. And I understood that you have to win with the government, you have to be head-on collision. You make a splash, you make it public, you expose, you do not let the story die out. You cannot let them roll over you. How do you deal with a bully? You knock him in the teeth. If you let him roll over you, he's going to keep bullying you. So you have to beat the bully. And so no, what I saw was tyranny in 2020, and just the hypocrisy. I mean, I could go to IKEA, and I went to IKEA, actually. I needed to buy something. And on the door, it said only 500 capacity people. Only 500. But at our church with 50 people was shut down, right? Our restaurants with, mom and pop shops where you have 5 people coming in at a time, shut down. Like all this stuff, like it just didn't make sense. This is tyranny. They want to destroy the medium, the middle class, the medium and small businesses. They just want to roll over us. This doesn't make any sense. This is what fascism looked like under Nazism. This is what communism looked like under the Soviet tyranny. This is what it looked like. They would suppress anyone who's making a stand, and they allowed Walmart to stay open, but your church has to close. It made no sense. So no, I absolutely supported everything my dad did. What he did with that Get Out video was like he was doing what everyone was thinking at the time, right? The world was kind of getting rolled over, and obviously there's people that disagree with the verbiage he used and stuff, but he lived through that. My grandparents lived through that. My great-grandparents lived through the words that he's using: Nazis, Gestapo, communists, KGB. This is my family's history, so we kind of know what we're talking about. And people disagree with the verbiage, but this is the tactics that those people use, the tyrants of old. So I absolutely supported everything he did. I was in school. I was just, trying to survive, getting my degree and finish that. And my university didn't let me, so I had to get involved in the fight on my own front. I staged student protests. They were just completely depriving students of their education that they paid tens of thousands of dollars for, and now the universities are saying you don't get to finish your degree because you won't adhere to an experimental mandate that the government is imposing. So I staged student protests, but I was with my dad and my family in the fight from day one.
And your other 2 siblings, I suspect they're similar.
They're in school.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in school, so they're just.
So your dad got the first ticket in Canada. I didn't know that, but that's interesting trivia for when this era is analyzed in the future. The Get Out, and I remember it at the time the video went viral, and they said and everyone's like, he's a hero. He first of all, not to undermine the hero part, said that he got them out, and I was like, yeah, he got them out for now. They're coming back with a warrant, and sure as sugar, they came back with a warrant and made his life a living hell. When did he? What was the progression of tickets, infractions, and then culminating in the arrest?
Well, after that video and exposing and kind of embarrassing the Canadian government on a global scale, they came back with a warrant. Like my dad said, come back with a warrant. So they did come back with a warrant, and they arrested him. However, they didn't actually come back. I think they realized our church is not the place to do it, because there's my dad at the door who's going to stop them. But there's also a bunch of other men that are going to stop them and yell at them and make this a very unpleasant spectacle for the government to kind of. It wouldn't have been in their best interest to come into the church again. So what they did is they got a court order that actually put every single Albertan under arrest. So anyone in Alberta that contravened public health orders by Alberta Health Services was liable to arrest. That was a court order made for all Albertans, and they came to our church and delivered it at the door. They put it through the cracks of the door, threw it on the ground. They didn't serve my dad. My dad didn't open it. They threw it on the ground, and he didn't open it. And after that was during church service. My dad was already preaching at the pulpit. They came to the door, delivered the papers, and then after his sermon, he's driving home, and that's when the highway arrest happened. That also went viral, where he was dragged on the highway in the rain with my uncle, and that was because of that. That's when they came back with that court order and arrested him.
The video of him being arrested on the side of the road, that was the first arrest, correct?
Yes.
Here, check this out, people. I'm going to pull it up and just let's see this here. Audio.
Arrested repeatedly, including a 51-day incarceration that drew national attention.
Look at this. Like
He
they're
was even
arrested.
arrested on a tarmac, and one time for simply planning to attend a public rally. Well, there's an up.
Yeah, that's the second arrest. This is like they're hauling Hannibal Lecter off. They have to put the grill on his face and tie him to a board so he doesn't lash out at the police officers. They issue the warrant. They then arrest him on the side of a busy highway, make it as public a spectacle as they can. How long was he detained for?
He was.
There we go.
He was in prison for 3 days that time. So they did it on the weekend, and when they do it on the weekend, usually you have to spend the weekend there, and then you're out on Monday or Tuesday. So he spent 3 days, I think 2 nights. Yeah, 3 days, 2 nights on a concrete cell. Actually, they did it illegally, so they didn't transfer him to anywhere with like a bench or a bed. They just kept him on cold, hard concrete floor for 3 days, him and my uncle. And then after that, it progressed. Him just attending a rally. He wasn't organizing the rally. He just went to a rally, kind of like what Maxime Bernier did, right? He just went to a rally, and for that, he was arrested because he's, contravening public health orders. And after that, it was 5 more arrests. So.
And I remember, I think I might get mixed up on the order because there's just so much in this story, but it was the first order where he had terms for his release that were issued by the court, where he, when exercising his First Amendment rights to criticize COVID policy, he had to include the government judge drafted caveat. While I'm entitled to my opinion, doctors and medical experts all agree that whatever. And that was an absurd part of it. We don't need to go over the entire procedure, but he got arrested. What's been the latest on his legal woes? I mean, he went to the States. He did a tour, which pissed off the authorities in Canada.
So that was 2021. He went to the state after he got out of prison. He decided, okay, well, I have to share what's going on in Canada to America. I have to go there, do a speaking tour, and let Americans know this is happening just across the border. And if you don't kind of smarten up, this is going to happen in your country. And he was right about that. There's actually, I'm sure you've heard there's been lots of arrests and the stuff with the FBI. I mean, the States is a mess, but in 2021, he was warning Americans, this is around the corner for you guys if you don't smarten up and start resisting this. So he went on tour there. He gets back. He's arrested on the tarmac. You showed the clip there.
Yeah, here let's bring this one up while we have it in the backdrop. People are going to think I really did my homework here. I'm able to fish it up while you're talking here. This is the second arrest.
All of those hardships.
This is where
Court of Appeal.
And people are going to say, well, he got on his knees and he made them carry him. I understand now, in retrospect, why, and especially in light of your explanation, why it had to be a vocal spectacle of an arrest and why he made it hard on them. I mean, this
of Alberta has handed Pastor Artur.
He won't move. This guy won't walk off to jail.
What they're calling a big victory.
There you go.
Won his appeals case against the Alberta Health Services for being fined, arrested, and jailed.
Well, he won the appeal for that outrageous court order that compelled speech while protecting free speech. So they arrest him on the tarmac, and then what happens?
Yeah, and then after that, it's actually hard to remember the order of all the arrests. It becomes a blur after a while. But there was one time, January 1st, 2021 or 2022, I don't remember now, but it was January 1st. It was New Year's Day, and we had a protest. It was a freedom rally against the mandates, and he just attended it. And him and my uncle were arrested on the snow. Probably saw that video too. It was it was nighttime, it was dark, and also the middle of the road in the snow, carried off to prison. And you're right, he doesn't make it easy on them. Why would he? When you're acting like a certain group of historical figures.
You can call them
Like-
Nazis.
like
You
the
can call them
Nazis.
Nazis.
Like the Nazis, like the communists, like the KGB, like the Gestapo. Well then do it the right way. You know, that's what he was yelling when he was on the highway. You know, do it the Nazi style. If you're gonna act like Nazis, well, do it right. Right? Show the world your true colors. So yeah, it has to be a spectacle, because if you go easily and you just comply your way, you can't comply your way out of this, right? Make it as difficult as you can. Make it as big of a spectacle as you can, because what they fear the most is being exposed. That's why they're so mad at me for going to European Union Parliament.
Yes. Well,
Right?
and we're getting there in a second, but yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and so there was a few more arrests. The big one, of course, is the one where he spent 50 days in prison because he went and did a sermon to the truckers. That's the big one. That's the most important one, because he was actually found guilty on that. And the penalty for inciting mischief is allegedly up to 10 years in prison. It could be nothing. He could be given a fine. Like, it's completely at the judge's discretion. He could give a fine. He could say time served. He could say, my dad spent 50 days, and I think 45 of those days was solitary confinement, nonstop. So that counts as time and a half time, because it's solitary confinement. That's worse punishment. Actually, anything over 14 days, according to the Geneva Convention, is considered torture. Anything over 14 days in solitary is considered torture.
Nathaniel, it was COVID, so they could
Yes,
do away
yeah, of
with
course.
it. They got to make sure he doesn't get back in there and infect the prison population with the virus that has.
It's actually funny. It's actually funny that you mentioned that, because after 14 days, he said the guards came to him and asked him if he would like to do a COVID test and take the vaccine. But he's like, wait, I just spent 14 days in solitary. Aren't I supposed to be cured of anything that I could have potentially had? Just like, yeah, but you should still take a test.
No, but well, he might have the long COVID in terms of long COVID contagion. Like his COVID will lay dormant for more than 2 weeks. The solitary confinement is something that I don't think people really, that some people who think it's not that big of a deal, who don't understand it, don't take a moment to actually put yourself in that position. Did your dad talk to you about that? Like I like to operate on the basis or take for granted that religious people who have faith can somehow deal with solitary confinement more than like neurotic people like myself, for example. Did he explain what that was like and how he got through that?
Yeah, well, it's difficult, of course, but because he does have faith, because God was with him, because he could read the Bible and pray, and he was fasting the entire time he was in there. He was on and off. He fasted for 2 weeks. Then my mom decided to take up the fast after that. And then they were on and off with my mom. But for the entire period of 50 days, one of the two was fasting. But my dad fasted, I think, a total of like 30 days or something. So anyway, lots of prayer, lots of people were praying for us. So he felt the hope. But it's not easy. It was very difficult to be alone for that long. He was 23 hours a day in a cell. And then he had sometimes half an hour, sometimes 45 minutes to a phone and to a shower. So he was given shower time. He had basically 1 hour out of cell, but no contact with humans. It was shower and phone call, basically. And sometimes the timing was different. Sometimes he only had 10 minutes. So over a period of 24 hours, he only had 10 minutes on the phone. The rest of the time was cell. So it's very difficult on any human being. Like I said, under the Geneva Convention, over 14 days is considered torture, because the human body, a human being needs human contact. You need other people, even if it's strangers. You need human contact. You need to talk with people, see faces. To be alone in a concrete cell for that long is torture to humans. So it was very difficult, of course. But because he has faith, because God was with him, he dealt with it.
I saw it on a Rogan podcast, and it stuck with me ever since, because I never really thought of it this way. But I think it was in the context of like higher order mammals that are kept in captivity in solitary confinement. So for a human, you have all the torture devices on Earth. You can rip their nails out. You can break ankles. The greatest torture for a human being is solitary confinement, or being alone. And it's torture. It is inhumane, and it's become Canadian society at large has become oblivious, blind, or tolerant of it, which it's unconscionable. Have you noticed him having gotten more scarred as a result of this most recent experience and this most recent run-in with incarceration?
No, I mean he's exactly the same. He has the same convictions, the same drive, but of course he understands that the Canadian government is capable of very evil things. He like I didn't think it was this bad. He didn't think he was even this bad. Where they're going to resort to torturing a human being in a Western free democracy. Like this is stuff they do in Russian prisons. Like you don't take someone's Bible away, rip it up, and ransack his room every couple days because you disagree with him, because you don't like him. Like you're supposed to give a human being dignity, even if they're an inmate, a prisoner. You're supposed to give them water when they ask for water, right? Water is a basic right. He was not given water for hours at a time when he was locked in a metal cage. So the prison has this thing where it's a metal cage that's about this wide, where just like your body can fit in it. It's very short, so your head would be touching if you were standing, and you're sitting in this box. And he was there on hours on end with very little airflow, like almost passing out because of the lack of oxygen. And he wasn't given water. Like these are forms of torture. And when he asked, "Why are you doing this to me? What are you doing? Why are you doing this, guard?" They would just laugh.
Following orders.
No, they just laughed at him. They just laughed at him. Like it's stuff like this that our lawyer has evidence of that potentially could help us down the line. We have evidence, and I have this. Several inmates that know my father because they were in there. So after I think the 40th day, the inmates there basically signed a petition to let my father out. They gave it to the director of the prison that that the prison should allow my father out for more hours of a day because what they're doing is inhumane. And actually that petition worked. And after about the 40th day, he was given more hours out. So it was like 2 or 3 hours now. So he's not 23 hours in a cell. He's 21, 22 hours in a cell. So it was a little bit better. And when he was out, he would have some human contact, very little still, but some, where he could do Bible studies, he could do prayers with it. And he actually won his entire unit over. And the entire unit was sitting at his Bible studies, talking to him, praying with him. And he was kind of like this light in a tunnel for this unit of people that were also in a solitary confinement situation. And it was actually the inmates that called me one time, and one of them, who we still have contact with, said the guards offered him incentives to beat him up, to beat up my dad. So more hours out of a cell, canteen money, food, like all sorts of incentives to beat him up. But because my dad won over his unit, they said absolutely not. Plus, inmates have this sort of code of respect, right? They're in it together. It's them against the establishment. There's kind of like this unsigned, code of conduct where it's inmates against guards kind of a mentality. So they said absolutely not. We're not going to do that to one of our own, and especially not a pastor, not a clergyman, not someone who's giving us hope. And 4 different inmates testified that they were offered incentives to beat up my father by guards, and they are willing to testify about this. These are inhumane, like Russian Soviet style tactics. This is KGB we're dealing with. So my father realizes like the Canadian government is capable of so much more than even he thought. We knew it was bad, but this bad? And Canadians do not care. We're so passive. We're so apathetic. We're just allowing this to happen. And that's the dangerous thing about this situation.
Soft times breed soft men, and soft men breed hard times. The question was this now. I asked about your dad and how he dealt with all of this. You got your mother and you and your siblings who do not have contact with your dad, if it's not every day, for a little bit of time, for the better part of the day, where you know that he's out there suffering in solitary, not knowing what happens because accidents happen in prison. How do you deal with this? How do you internalize this? And how do you cope with this while it's happening?
Well, it was very difficult on our family, of course. But however, with my character, with my personality, I couldn't just sit at home and just wonder, what's going to happen to him, and just kind of mope around. What I decided to do is do exactly what my father taught, which is head-on collision. You fight them. You do not let them get over. You expose them and you fight to the death. So Of course, I mean that figuratively, not fight to the death physically.
Yeah, you got to weigh your words now, because if the government wants to misinterpret something, so they can
anything,
persecute.
anything. Yeah. So yeah, everything my family talks about when we talk about fighting, we talk about when we use metaphors and stuff, it's always peaceful, because my dad grew up watching the Solidarity Movement, which is kind of what Martin Luther King Jr. did, which is a peaceful non-compliance resistance. And that is the most effective way to win. I believe you have Mahatma Gandhi, you have Martin Luther King Jr., you have Solidarity Movement. You can win by non-compliance. You can win by boycotts and stuff. And so what I did is I staged the longest ongoing protest in the prison system. To my knowledge, it's the longest ongoing prison protest in Canadian jail history. So I was there every single day with a group of people ranging from sometimes 20 people, sometimes to 250, 300 people. One day we had the truckers that were coming back from Ottawa, and they stopped at the prison. And we had hundreds of people, hundreds of cars and trucks surrounding the prison, blowing their horns, saying, "Free Pastor Art." So every single day since my dad was arrested on day one, I was there. Our church was there, friends, supporters, freedom people, freedom fighters. We were outside the prison protesting this illegal incarceration. And every time they would do something to him, I would grab a microphone, I would go to the media, and I would say, "This is what's happening to my father on the inside. We cannot let them get away with this." We were making them uncomfortable. We brought speakers, music. I would speak to them. I would do speeches. We would have speakers. And that was what we were doing every single day. We were there protesting.
There was someone had brought up to my awareness that there was a suspicion, perhaps, that Mahatma Gandhi was actually paid to adopt a passive, non-compliance, to prevent a more violent revolution that might have been more effective. I had never even thought of this, but it's interesting parentheses to look into at one point in the future.
I would disagree, because I have familiar history with the Solidarity Movement. So the Solidarity Movement was basically a union strike. It was basically a workers' strike. What they did is they decided, okay, so 50,000 communists are ruling over 36 million Poles in Poland. It was only 50,000 bureaucrats, communists ruling over 35 million Polish people. Well, something that doesn't add up. Why are we allowing this to happen? They thought. So let's not work for them. Let's not work for the communists. Let's take it to the streets. And yeah, some of us might get shot. Some of us might get arrested. We might get tickets. But this is enough. Enough is enough. The tyranny has to end somehow. So they just decided non-compliance. We take it to the streets. We paralyze their system. We will no longer work for the tyrants. And that's what actually brought the Berlin Wall down, broke the Iron Curtain, and the Eastern Bloc was liberated. Hungary saw what Poland was doing, picked up the same thing. They did the same thing, repelled the Soviets. And it was just a trickle effect of this non-compliance, peaceful resistance. And yeah, Polish people were shot. They didn't shoot back, but they were shot. They brought tanks to the street. People were murdered. Tens of thousands of people were arrested. People were ticketed. But that's the nature of what, right? That's what happened with the trucker convoy.
Well, that's
truckers were arrested.
And I'm going to say this: I do not believe that violence is the answer, even as much as people don't like me saying that, because violence is exactly what they want, so they can more easily just.
Trudeau wanted there to be violence.
Oh yeah,
he wanted a reason to justify the Emergency Act. And he wanted people to get violent, and he didn't get it. So that to sell that the Emergency Act was justified, yeah, he can pay off that inquiry thing. He can buy the judge, he can buy the commissioner, he can have his family friend do the thing. But the court of public opinion knows that was wrong. It was unjust. But if there was any violence, any guns, or anything like that, well, then he would have been justified in doing it. But no, he on the world stage, he trampled people with horses. And there was nothing. They were met with peaceful resistance, and they came with an iron fist. And that is what tyrants fear, because it exposes them for who they are.
Well, we now know from the commission that they refused the negotiated settlement in order to invoke the Emergencies Act. They wanted the violence, and the kick in the teeth in all of this is, like, you talk about the Solidarity movement in Eastern Europe and how it paralyzed the system, which is what changed changed history. But they criminalized paralyzing the system in Canada. So that's now an act of violence. If a protest is too effective, it's an act of violence.
Well, the Solidarity movement was outlawed too. It actually took 10 years for the Solidarity movement to get to where it was. It started off and they were crushed. It was outlawed. They were arrested, beaten, tortured, shot, and it failed. The first couple times it failed. And then finally, when enough people grew in number and there was like millions of people that finally said, okay, we must, enough people, enough of the masses says enough is enough, and they took it to the streets, stopped working for the communists, and that's when it actually grew momentum. So the first couple times it was outlawed and they were crushed, but that's just how change happens. It sometimes it starts slow.
Now you mentioned that tyrants don't like being embarrassed on a any form of a scale. This is going to segue us perfectly into what happened in before European Parliament and how you ended up there to give your speech. We watched your speech yesterday, and then I said, everybody go watch the second half, which is your dad talking. At least certain members of European Parliament thoroughly lambasted Justin Trudeau before the European Parliament. How did you end up there?
Yeah, so we know some members of European Parliament, and there was a citizens initiative going on in European Parliament, where basically they're saying what the WHO is doing, what is going on is just, it's unacceptable, and we have to stop this somehow. So citizens are testifying, members of European Parliament are testifying that the framework that they're setting up under this guise of health and safety and protection is actually ushering in tyranny. Right? They have a scapegoat, which is your health and public safety and climate change and all these other stupid excuses that they're gonna make to take away your rights and freedoms. And so they know my father, and they invited him, but because of his house arrest and conditions, he couldn't make it. So I went in his stead. And there was several members of European Parliament, amazing people, testimonies, and I got to share the story on a world stage at the European Parliament in Brussels. And I said what I had on my heart, which is, what they're doing to pastors. If they can get away with this, well, then they can get away with anything. If we send a message, it's kind of like that situation where we had with Nazi Germany, where we allowed them to annex Czechoslovakia, when we allowed them to annex Austria. And if you allow these countries to do certain things, well, then you're setting them up to do even more evil things. So if we allow Canada to treat pastors this way, then we're allowing them to treat anyone this way. And then that sets a precedent to what you will allow in your own country. And this is this kind of domino trickle effect. If you allow tyranny to settle in anywhere, you can settle for it everywhere. So I got to share what I had on my heart, and it went amazing.
You met Christine Anderson while you were in Europe?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
she came to Calgary as well. We met her before, so we know her, and she's amazing. She's the one who called out Trudeau when no one else would, and she stood up for Canadians when no one else would. So we invited her to Calgary. My dad white-hatted her, which is it's a Calgarian tradition where you give a foreign dignitary a white cowboy hat, because we're the Texas of Canada in Alberta, and we have that kind of Western tradition. So my dad white-hatted her, so we know her. There was another member of European Parliament, Mislav is his name, amazing man, and a few others, and they're very sympathetic to the cause. They completely want to help, and it was a great experience.
Your dad, now I think we might have not discussed this in much detail. He got convicted of the sermon in which he referenced the solidarity movement in Poland.
Yeah.
So convicted on was it inciting mischief, or it couldn't be mischief itself because there was no mischief there. It's just inciting. It's a thought crime.
Yeah.
You got convicted on it. And like you specify, like under the criminal code, if it's a misdemeanor or if it's a felony, carries a greater or lesser maximum sentence. In theory, a maximum sentence for, I didn't realize this, for incitement of mischief, which is as nebulous a charge as seditious conspiracy. It's nothing more than thought crime, speech crime. Maximum of 10 years. Whether or not he gets that, separate issue. Whether or not he succeeds on an appeal, separate issue. But he's been convicted of incitement of mischief based on that sermon to truckers.
Yeah. And what the judge basically is saying, that because my dad is the first person to go to trial for any kind of trucker related thing, because he's guilty of inciting mischief, that means every single trucker that participated in the truck convoy is guilty of mischief. Also a crime that carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. So everyone that participated in the truck convoy mischief. You're all guilty of mischief. And because my dad told them to stand for the rights, do it solidarity style, he didn't tell them to block any roads. He didn't tell them to commit any crimes. He just said, stand for your rights and do it peacefully. That speech, that sermon is on YouTube, public for everyone. It's 19 minutes long from start to finish.
What's amazing, I'm looking to see if I can find it here. We won't watch it now, but I'll find it and maybe I'll do an analysis of it later. In Quebec,
and that's what they did. That's what the court did. They did there was no witnesses. There was no evidence. The only thing they did is they took the transcript of that speech, of that sermon, and they went word by word. What is it that Artur Pawlowski meant? What is it that this pastor meant by this word? What is it meant by this word? And the Crown basically claimed that he meant that he was inciting people to commit crimes. He was inciting this coup d'état against the government, and when in reality it was just peaceful Canadians that said, "Stop persecuting us. We live in a democracy." You know, they say this is a threat to our democracy. No. What you mean by that is you mean your oligarchy. Democracy is the will of the people. So if the people say we have enough, then why are you saying this is a threat to democracy? No, you're just, what you mean is this is a threat to your oligarchy, is what you mean by that. So, yeah, that's what he was found guilty on, inciting mischief, which is a thought crime.
What's amazing also is that I'm from Quebec. You know, like when we had protests, there's an expression, so solidarité. I mean, that's what they say. That's what the unions say is solidarity. It's a concept. It's a term. And whether or not he was even specifically referencing the Polish solidarity movement, which crippled the infrastructure or paralyzed, the nation, that's now illegal. You can protest, but it just can't, hit critical infrastructure, bridges, traffic. Can't be too much honking. My goodness, when does he go for sentencing, and is he appealing that decision, as far as you know?
Yeah, so we can't appeal until the sentencing. So August 9th, this August 9th is the sentencing. We'll appeal it immediately after sentencing, of course. But yeah, sentencing is August 9th, so we don't know which way the judge can go. It's interesting because when the trial was going on, the judge seemed relatively reasonable. He seemed sympathetic. And then during the verdict, it was like the guy switched completely. It was like he was a different person. It was almost like he was told what to do. I'm speculating, of course, but I wouldn't put it past them to have told this judge what to do, because this isn't a normal trial. Everything that was done in this trial was politically motivated. It's a political trial. It's what my dad calls a show trial, which they had in communism. Right, they're just sending a message to everyone else who wants to make a stand.
No, where was it? I mean, I was comparing the Jan Sixers to Otto Warmbier or Russia with Brittany Griner. They had trials in Russia, they had trials in North Korea. They just took an hour to convict a guy to 13 years hard labor because he stole government paraphernalia. They had a trial, they had witnesses. It was judicial, it was lawful. Okay, so your dad, that's the latest on your dad. I think I'm going to get him on, potentially before, or we'll see after sentencing. So you go to Europe, and upon return now, this is the breaking news, is you don't know what for yet, but there's a warrant for your arrest. Do you know if it's another nationwide warrant, or is this just a Calgary warrant?
It's just Calgary, because the officer here in Montreal said if it was a Canada-wide, well, he'd be forced to arrest me, but it's not, so he's not going to do that. It's just a Calgary matter, so Calgary police issued the warrant. Like I said, I left the country using my passport with no problem. There was no flags. There was no anything. So, again, I have to speak to a lawyer and get the evidence for this. But there was no warrant prior to me leaving to Europe, and now I come back and there's a warrant.
Have you ever been arrested, or have you have any outstanding tickets that you don't know?
I have been detained for I was preaching, and I was what they call protesting a drag event, because there was an all-age public library that's funded by Calgary tax dollars, a drag event for 0 to 8 year olds, provocatively dressed drag queens with questionable material when it comes to books. I kind of decided that I was going to do something about it, but what the mayor did is passed a bylaw that states you're not allowed to protest a drag event within 100 meters of a drag event.
Just to highlight the absolute insanity here, the legislators, the government could not pass laws as relates to mandates and all that stuff. They went through emergency health orders, and yet they somehow in Quebec they found time to pass a law that says you can't protest within 100 meters of a school or a hospital to protest COVID stuff. You could protest, like other union stuff, and they did the same thing in Calgary. Sorry to stop you there, but just keep fleshing that out for the people who don't know.
Yeah, they did. They did the same thing in Calgary, but this time it's regarding drag events. So even if I'm on a public sidewalk outside of a public library, which I was apparently breaking this bylaw. So I was detained very, very briefly. They just wrote me up the tickets. And so they delivered that to my house. And my appearance for that is July 11th. So that's in a couple days. And obviously I'm going to go to that. I don't know why the warrant would be issued regarding that, since my court appearance is July 11th, which is not yet. So I don't know if it's regarding that. If it is, then that means it's a computer error, or they're just messing with me, or I have no idea what this is about. But it's I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything illegal. I'm very aware of the law. I'm very aware of my charter rights. I'm very aware of what I can do legally and what I can't do. And I didn't break any law. And yet they charged me with 2 counts of breaking a bylaw for protesting outside of a drag event. But again, I don't know why they would issue a warrant for something that isn't coming up for a couple days. So.
Very interesting. Okay, we're going to see where that goes. Let me see, Nathaniel. Hold on. I'm going to get to. I want to bring some super chats up. First of all, I want to bring this one up. It's not a super chat. Canada has become a third world country. Full stop. Great interview. Pastor Pawlowski is a hero and a national treasure. 100% respect. I remember when there were verses of the Bible read in the morning before classes and singing the Canadian anthem. Oh, they're going to change the Canadian anthem, people. Your dad's reward in heaven is so great, I can't imagine. He's living the witness of Paul the Apostle. We're praying for you and him here in Florida, Dad. Someone I know him well from the channel. And we got Bravo, Nathaniel. And this one I already answered. Let me see. There was a question in our locals community. Okay, no, not related. All right, so now the question is this. So you're heading back to Calgary now. You're going to go find out what the deal is. What's the rest of your summer schedule?
Well, I'm not sure. I started a movement for young people. When I was touring with my dad and then later with my mom, I realized the United States has movements for freedom-minded, socially conservative people. I don't like using even that word conservatives because it's kind of been hijacked, but people that lean more that way for youth in the United States. They have the Daily Wire, Turning Point, PragerU. And I decided, well, we don't have anything for young people in Canada where they can kind of join together behind a movement. So I started one. It's called True Dominion Canada. And that's what I've been focusing on. That's what I've been doing, building this kind of framework where I can help university, high school students get involved in their local communities and stand up to certain ideological agendas and government overreach and how they can get involved locally. Plus I do some social media and videos and stuff. And that's what I've been focusing on. So that's what I'm doing. Of course, we have to focus on helping my dad win this case and get it thrown out because it's politically motivated. It can be politically undone. So it's not a justice matter. It's not a matter of justice. It's a matter of politics. So I have to focus on putting pressure on the Canadian authorities. That's why my dad gave you those numbers to people to contact and people to call, because enough pressure can help. It can help the cause. So his sentencing is August 9th. So we're doing our best to try to keep him out of prison because, if he goes down, this sets a precedent for all of Canada that anything you say can be interpreted or misinterpreted as mischief. So any politician even or media personality.
Well, actually, it's worse. It's not mischief itself because that's an act. Incitement of mischief, which is a thought or a word.
A thought crimes. It's a version of hate speech, which is just speech that the government disagrees with and they can charge you for it. It's his George Orwell in living flesh. So yeah, we're doing our best to pressure the Canadian government and the justice system, the Crown Prosecutor, the judge, the Justice Department, the Minister of Justice, the Premier, to stop this political trial that is attempting to put him in prison.
I've just asked my locals community, our locals community, and Rumble if there's any questions that I have not gotten to. Nacho Kitty says, "How can we help?" Nathaniel, you'll send me all the links that I'll put in the pinned comment afterwards, so people can know where to find you and what they can do to help. I see that the biggest help is awareness and polite discussion with friends and family, and then maybe sassy discussion on Twitter, because anybody who says that they don't have a problem with this doesn't understand it or is part of the problem, and in which case it'll affect how you interact with them, in terms of persuasion methods. And I don't mean like violence or not. You won't be able to convince the people who are part of this problem, but they're not the ones who are going to be part of the solution. It's going to be waking everybody up to this and making them realize it's not okay to let an Albertan woman die because she refuses to get a jab. And awareness and bother the politicians. They're public servants. They were elected to serve the people. You can write them, you can email them, just don't threaten them, people. Kevin Q says, "Have you spoken with Prager?" And I think they mean PragerU. Have you been interviewed or been?
I haven't yet. Love to get in contact if anyone has that.
I'll help you with that. We'll do that offline afterwards. There was another question here. It says, "Is there any way to deal with all the matters suffered in one case to relieve emotional pressure of dealing with it?" No. This is from Ricky Bobby. They're gonna first of all, it's not even like you can have individual plaintiffs sort of join up and have all of these issues addressed at one time. It's the process is the punishment. And let me see if you're here. Okay. So now you're on your way back to Calgary. You're going to see what happens. Okay. And then I think that's it, Nathaniel. Is there anything that I should have asked you that you want to say because I didn't ask you the question?
No, I think we've covered a lot. We jumped around a lot, but it's good. It's a complicated thing because people don't understand the nuance of it, because there's just so much that's been going on over the last many years, and there's so many trials and so much detail. And my dad will help you kind of bring light to a lot of the stuff that I didn't mention or forgot to mention, or he knows more about. But some of the things, if you ask him the right questions, it'll blow your mind. For example, some of the incentives he was offered to stop doing what he's doing, right? He's been offered multiple times. I'd say around 10 times, money or a job or an offer or different kind of bribes to stop doing what he's doing. He's taken none of them. So what are they doing? Now they're going after him for his freedom. They're going after him legally. They're going after him, politically. So yeah, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of complicated things to go over, but that's just the nature of the story.
All right, phenomenal. I say phenomenal in the worst way possible. I don't know if you've noticed it. I think my grimace wrinkle has grown radically during this interview. We will keep in touch, and if and when there's more news, you're always welcome to come back on. Welcome. It would be my honor to have you back on. I am going to get. Hopefully it's in person, but Artur we're going to make that happen as well. And I say awareness, snip and clip and tag people. But my concern is that I don't think Americans are paying enough attention to what's going on here as it relates to this, as it relates to other, the Sheila Lewis out of Alberta, as it relates to Sean Hartman and his father. This trickles down. And once the precedent has been set that peaceful protests can be violently suppressed in Canada, well, it's going to go to California, it's going to go to New York, it'll go to Michigan first, and then it'll go to the rest of freedom-loving America. It doesn't stop here. This is sort of like the analogy goes, the domino. Nathaniel, stay strong. Don't do anything stupid. Don't give them the reason, but they don't need the reason. And that's it. Stick around. We will say our proper goodbyes. I will link everywhere that you want me to link to in the pinned comments. And one more time, let me just make sure that there's no more questions here. Okay, we're good. I think we're good. Okay, we'll come back on if I've missed anything. I think we covered everything. We covered a lot for an hour and 10 minutes. Nathaniel, thank you. Everybody out there, see you Sunday night. Peace out, peeps.